"I'm wet, but not from the rain," the Black Widow whispered to the giant cowboy as lightning split the sky above their makeshift shelter, her voice carrying secrets that could shatter both their worlds. The townsfolk of Copper Ridge see her as cursed, a woman whose very presence brings misfortune, marked by skin and circumstance to remain forever cast out. They whisper she'll die alone, forgotten like dust in the wind. But the giant cowboy sees something else entirely when their paths collide in that storm-torn barn, a kindred spirit carrying burdens that mirror his own haunted past. Hidden beneath her tears lies a desperate search for stolen family, while his gentle hands conceal a violent history that could destroy them both. Their unlikely alliance threatens to expose a criminal empire spanning the frontier, but survival demands trusting each other with deadly secrets. Can two broken souls forge something unbreakable, or will their combined darkness consume what little light remains in their shattered lives? The wagon wheels creaked to a halt outside Copper Ridge's general store as dust swirled around the lone passenger. Susanna Calloway stepped down with careful dignity, her dark skin drawing immediate stares from the afternoon crowd. Whispers followed her movement like hungry vultures. "That's her, the Black Widow. Heard she brings death wherever she goes. Lost 3 husbands, they say." Suki kept her chin high as she approached the store owner, a thin man who looked at her like she carried plague. She needed lodging. He quoted a price 3 times the usual rate. She paid without argument. The cramped room above the store barely fit a bed and wash basin. Through the thin walls, she heard neighbors discussing her arrival in hushed, fearful tones. Some suggested she leave before sundown. Others wondered what curse she'd bring to their town. By morning, the harassment began in earnest. Children threw pebbles at her window. Women crossed the street rather than walk near her. When she attempted to offer sewing services at the store, customers refused her work with barely concealed disgust. "We don't need your kind of help," one rancher's wife declared loudly enough for others to hear. Suki retreated to her room, fingers tracing the faded photograph of her younger brother Tobias. Somewhere in this territory, he remained trapped by the same cruel system that had stolen her life's work. The men who'd taken credit for her designs had ensured her silence by keeping Tobias as their guarantee. Her escape from Boston had only moved their game westward. Days blurred into a routine of rejection and isolation. The townspeople had decided her fate before she'd spoken a word. She would remain an outcast, feared and scorned until she finally moved on or died forgotten. 3 streets away, Elijah Boone faced his own daily torment. His massive frame cast shadows that made children cry and adults reach for weapons. At nearly 7 feet tall, he was condemned to loneliness by his appearance. Employers hired him for the heaviest labor, then paid him half wages while treating him like a dangerous animal. The blacksmith who'd employed him that week made him sleep in the stable rather than the workers' quarters. Other men refused to eat at the same table. Even the prostitutes turned away his money, too frightened by his size to see the gentleness in his eyes. Eli carried his own photograph, creased from handling. The dead man's face stared back at him, a reminder of the moment his life changed forever. Self-defense or murder, the law saw no difference when the defender was a giant and the dead man wore a badge, even if that badge belonged to a slave catcher pursuing an innocent family. The storm struck Copper Ridge on a Thursday evening with biblical fury. Rain hammered the dusty streets into rivers of mud, while lightning split the sky like divine judgment. Suki fled the general store when water began seeping through her ceiling, clutching her precious sewing supplies against the downpour. The abandoned barn at the town's edge offered the only shelter. She pushed through the creaking door, grateful for the dry hay and solid roof. Thunder masked the sound of her quiet sobs as the weight of her situation finally overwhelmed her careful composure. She wasn't alone. Eli Boone sat in the far corner, his enormous frame making the barn seem smaller. Both froze at the sight of each other. The town's 2 outcasts, trapped together by nature's fury. Minutes passed in tense silence. Rain drummed against the wooden walls while they studied each other with cautious eyes. Neither spoke until lightning illuminated Suki's tear-stained face. "I'm wet, but not from the rain," she whispered to the giant cowboy, her voice carrying a pain that transcended their circumstances. Eli nodded slowly. He understood tears that had nothing to do with weather. "Me too," he replied simply. The admission broke something between them. Suki found herself explaining about Tobias, about the men in Boston who'd stolen her designs and enslaved her family to ensure her silence. She spoke of the trail that led west, following whispers of her brother's location to this hostile town. Eli listened without judgment. When she finished, he shared his own burden. The slave catcher he'd killed in self-defense. The family he'd saved. The guilt that drove him from town to town, never staying long enough to belong anywhere. "Your brother," Eli said finally. "You have a lead," Suki nodded toward the storm. "Blackstone Ranch, north of here. But it might as well be the moon for all the good it does me. Cornelius Blackstone owns half this county, his men, his rules. You know him. Worked his cattle last month. Something strange about that place. Too many workers who don't talk. Too many guards for a simple ranch." Hope flickered in Suki's chest for the first time in weeks. This giant cowboy, this fellow outcast, possessed knowledge she desperately needed. Outside, the storm raged with increasing violence. Inside the barn, two broken souls recognized something in each other that transcended their individual pain. Neither yet understood how their chance meeting would transform them from helpless victims into unstoppable forces of justice. But in that moment, sheltered from the storm and surrounded by the possibility of alliance, both felt the first stirrings of something they'd nearly forgotten. Hope. The morning after the storm brought fresh hostility to Suki's doorstep. She discovered her sewing basket overturned in the mud outside the general store, precious threads scattered and ruined by deliberate malice. The store owner claimed ignorance while his smirk revealed the truth. Suki knelt in the street, salvaging what remained of her supplies. Passers-by stepped around her without acknowledgement, their silence more cutting than open cruelty. Her fingers trembled as she gathered soggy fabric scraps that represented her only means of survival. A shadow fell across her work. Eli Boone stood nearby, his massive frame blocking the morning sun. The townspeople gave him a wider berth than usual, their fear palpable in the early air. "Accident?" he asked, gesturing to the scattered materials. "So they claim." Without another word, Eli began collecting the furthest scattered threads. His enormous hands moved with surprising delicacy, treating each salvaged piece like precious silk. The sight of the giant cowboy helping the cursed widow sent fresh waves of whispers through the gathering crowd. They retreated to Suki's cramped room to assess the damage. Most of her thread had survived, but her needles were bent beyond use and her measuring ribbon torn beyond repair. Eli examined her supplies with unexpected knowledge. "This stitching," he said, studying a partially completed dress. "Never seen work this fine." Suki tensed. She'd been careful to keep her technique simple, hiding her true skill behind basic seamstress work. But Eli's trained eye had caught details others missed. "My grandmother taught me," she deflected. Eli lifted the fabric closer to the window light. The stitches were microscopic, precise beyond anything a frontier seamstress should possess. The pattern itself spoke of formal training and years of refinement. "This isn't grandmother teaching. This is art." The accusation hung between them like a loaded weapon. Suki's carefully constructed cover story crumbled under his scrutiny. She could lie, maintain her deception, and lose his trust forever. Or she could risk everything on the truth. "You worked for wealthy families," Eli continued, his voice gentle but certain. "Boston, maybe New York. These techniques don't exist out here." Suki's resistance shattered. The weight of months carrying her secret alone finally overwhelmed her defenses. She sank onto her narrow bed, shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. "Susanna Calloway," she whispered. "That was my professional name." Eli's eyes widened with recognition. Even on the frontier, certain names carried weight among the wealthy families who ordered custom clothing from back east. "The wedding dress designer. Heard ranchers' wives talking about your work. Said you disappeared." "I didn't disappear. I ran." The story poured out like water through a broken dam. Her partnership with the Boston design house. The gradual realization that her white partners were claiming credit for her creations, while paying her fraction wages. The discovery that they held Tobias as insurance against her defection. They told everyone I was their seamstress, Suki continued, her voice gaining strength. But every design, every innovation, every technique that made them rich came from my mind and my hands. Eli listened without interruption as she described her escape. The careful planning, the forged papers, the desperate flight westward following rumors of her brother's location. Tobias was their guarantee I'd stay silent. When I ran, they moved him west as punishment. Now he's lost somewhere in this territory, probably sold to someone like Blackstone. Why not go to the authorities? Suki's laugh held no humor. With what proof? My word against theirs. They have contracts showing me as their employee. I have nothing but accusations. Eli set down the dress, his expression thoughtful. He moved to the small window, gazing toward the distant mountains where Blackstone Ranch lay hidden. Your grandmother, he said finally. What did she really teach you? Suki hesitated, then opened her sewing basket's hidden compartment. Inside lay older samples of fabric, each marked with seemingly decorative patterns. To untrained eyes, they appeared to be simple embellishments. Messages, she explained. My grandmother helped runaways find safe houses. She taught me to hide information in needlework, routes, dangers, friendly contacts, all invisible unless you know how to read them. Eli examined the samples with new understanding. The patterns weren't random decorations but coded communications, each stitch carrying meaning beyond its aesthetic purpose. You've been leaving messages in your work all along. Every dress I've made since Boston, breadcrumbs for Tobias if he ever gets the chance to see them, instructions for others who might need help. The revelation transformed everything between them. Suki wasn't just a talented seamstress hiding from cruel former employers. She was an artist and secret communicator whose skills could serve purposes far beyond mere survival. Blackstone's daughter, Eli said suddenly. Martha. She's getting married next month. So, rich families want the best for their daughters' weddings, especially when they're trying to impress territorial politicians and business partners. Understanding dawned in Suki's eyes. Her reputation, even under her assumed name, had begun spreading among the ranch wives who could afford quality work. A wedding dress commission for Blackstone's daughter would provide access to the heavily guarded ranch. You think I could get close enough to find Tobias? I think your real talents just became our greatest weapon. Outside, the townspeople continued their daily routines, unaware that their despised Black Widow had just revealed herself to be someone far more dangerous than their superstitions imagined. In the cramped room above the general store, two outcasts had discovered that their combined skills might be enough to challenge the powerful forces that had destroyed their lives. The hunt for Tobias was about to begin. Eli's confession came 3 days later as they planned their approach to Blackstone Ranch. He'd been watching Suki practice her coded stitching when the weight of his own secrets became unbearable. I killed a man, he said simply. Suki's needle paused mid-stitch. She'd sensed darkness in his past but hadn't pressed for details. Now the truth hung between them like morning fog. Self-defense, Eli continued. But that doesn't change the fact he's dead because of me. The story unfolded slowly. 2 years ago, outside Dodge City, Eli had encountered a family of runaways hiding in his camp. 3 children, parents worn thin by fear and exhaustion. They'd been traveling for weeks, following the Underground Railroad toward freedom. The slave catcher arrived at dawn with a federal warrant and cruel intentions. He demanded Eli hand over the family or face charges as an accomplice. When Eli refused, the man drew his weapon. I'm not fast with a gun, Eli explained. But I'm strong. When he fired, I was already moving. Got my hands on him before he could shoot again. The struggle lasted seconds. The slave catcher's neck snapped like dry kindling in Eli's massive grip. The family escaped, but Eli became a wanted man. Not for the death itself, but for interfering with federal law. Been running ever since, helping where I can but never staying long enough to matter. Suki set down her needlework. The gentle giant who'd shown her kindness was also a killer, regardless of his motives. But his victims were the same system that had stolen her brother and destroyed her life. The family made it to Canada, last I heard. Then it was worth it. Eli's surprise at her acceptance revealed how long he'd carried the guilt alone. Suki understood the weight of necessary choices that civilized society would never forgive. Your contacts, she said, other railroad operations. Some, scattered across 3 territories, people who remember favors owed. Their alliance deepened with shared purpose. Eli's network of sympathetic contacts complemented Suki's coded communication skills. Both had been fighting the same war from different positions. The plan crystallized over the following week. Suki would use her genuine talents to infiltrate Blackstone's social circle through Martha's wedding preparations. Eli would work various ranches, gathering intelligence while staying mobile enough to avoid recognition. Suki's first breakthrough came when Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, reluctantly commissioned a dress after seeing samples of her work. Word spread among the wealthy ranch wives who competed fiercely for social status. Within days, Suki had 3 commissions and a reputation for exceptional craftsmanship. Martha Blackstone herself appeared at the general store on a Thursday morning, accompanied by 2 armed escorts who waited outside. The young woman seemed nervous, constantly glancing toward the door as if expecting threats. "I heard about your work," Martha said quietly. "My wedding dress needs alterations." Suki agreed to visit the ranch for a proper fitting. The invitation was exactly what they'd hoped for, but Martha's fearful demeanor suggested complications they hadn't anticipated. Eli spent his days working different ranches, piecing together information about Blackstone's operations. The man owned more land than any single person should control, worked by an unusually large labor force that seemed reluctant to talk. At the Morrison spread, Eli learned that Blackstone's workers were housed separately from regular ranch hands. At the Patterson place, he heard whispers about men who arrived in chains but were supposedly voluntary workers. The picture that emerged painted Blackstone as something far worse than a simple rancher. "Slave labor," Eli reported during one of their secret meetings. "Legal on paper, but the workers aren't free to leave." Tobias. "Haven't seen him yet, but the descriptions match what you'd expect. Young men mostly, working the furthest fields where visitors won't see them." Suki's visit to Blackstone Ranch confirmed their worst suspicions. The main house displayed wealth beyond anything else in the territory, built on foundations of human suffering. Martha led her through rooms filled with expensive furnishings, while armed guards watched from doorways. During the dress fitting, Suki caught glimpses through the windows of workers in the distant fields. Their movements spoke of exhaustion and despair rather than honest labor. One figure, thin and young, made her heart race with recognition. Tobias. Her brother worked among a group harvesting cotton under the watchful eyes of armed overseers. He was alive, but his condition spoke of months of brutal treatment. Suki forced herself to continue the fitting while memorizing every detail of the ranch's layout. Martha noticed her distraction. "Something wrong?" "Just admiring the view. Your father's built something impressive." "He works very hard," Martha replied, but her tone suggested complicated feelings about her father's methods. Back in town, Suki and Eli compared intelligence. The ranch employed at least 30 guards for what should have been simple agricultural work. The worker quarters were surrounded by high fences that looked more like prison walls than employee housing. "Getting him out won't be simple theft," Eli concluded. "This is a military operation. Then we make it bigger than just Tobias." Suki's plan was audacious. Instead of a quiet rescue that might succeed but leave the system intact, they would expose the entire operation publicly during Martha's wedding celebration. "All the territorial politicians will be there," she explained. "Business leaders from 3 counties. If we can prove what Blackstone's doing in front of witnesses like that, he can't cover it up." Eli understood the stakes. Success would free dozens of enslaved workers and destroy a criminal empire. Failure would likely get them all killed. "Your grandmother's codes," he said. "Can you hide evidence in the wedding dress itself?" Suki smiled grimly. "Better than that. I'm going to make Martha's wedding present tell the whole story." The threads of their plan were finally coming together. each stitch leading toward a confrontation that would determine not just Tobias's fate, but the future of every soul trapped within Blackstone's empire of cruelty. Suki's second visit to Blackstone Ranch came under the pretense of final dress alterations. Martha greeted her with unusual warmth, leading her to a private sitting room away from the main house bustle. The young woman's nervous energy had transformed into something approaching desperation. "I need to show you something," Martha whispered, glancing toward the closed door. From beneath a stack of wedding invitations, she produced a leather-bound ledger. The pages contained neat columns of figures, names, and dates that painted a horrifying picture. Purchase prices for human beings, transportation costs for merchandise, profit margins calculated in blood and suffering. "I found this in Father's study," Martha continued, her voice trembling. "These aren't employee records." Suki studied the entries with growing rage. Tobias's name appeared on a page dated 3 months earlier, listed as inventory transferred from Boston operation. The casual documentation of her brother's enslavement made her hands shake. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I think you're looking for someone, and because I can't pretend anymore that my father's wealth comes from honest work." The revelation changed everything. Martha Blackstone wasn't just an unknowing beneficiary of her father's crimes. She was a potential ally with access to evidence that could destroy the entire operation. "What do you want from me?" "Help me stop him. After the wedding, when all the important people are here as witnesses, we can expose everything publicly." Suki felt the threads of fate weaving together in ways she'd never imagined. Martha's offer provided the missing piece of their plan, but it also introduced dangerous new variables. Meanwhile, Eli's intelligence gathering had taken a frightening turn. A bounty hunter named Wade Morrison had arrived in town asking questions about a giant who'd killed a federal officer near Dodge City. Eli's past was catching up just as their mission reached its most critical phase. He moved between ranches with increased caution, gathering final details about Blackstone's security arrangements. The wedding celebration would bring unprecedented numbers of guards to protect the assembled dignitaries, but it would also provide chaos they could exploit. At the Peterson spread, Eli encountered 2 of Blackstone's former workers who'd somehow escaped. Their testimonies painted Blackstone's operation as far worse than slavery. Workers who complained disappeared permanently. Those who tried to escape faced brutal punishments designed to terrify others into compliance. "Your brother," one escapee told Suki during a secret meeting. "Seen him in the far fields. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's got fight left in him. Talks about someone coming to find him." The knowledge that Tobias maintained hope gave Suki strength for the dangerous path ahead, but time was running short. The wedding was scheduled for the following weekend, and Morrison the bounty hunter grew closer to identifying Eli each day. Suki worked feverishly on Martha's wedding present, a quilt that would serve as the centerpiece of their revelation. Each panel contained coded information about Blackstone's criminal network, financial records hidden in decorative patterns, names and locations stitched into seemingly random designs, a complete indictment disguised as wedding artistry. The technical challenge pushed her skills to their limits. The information had to be invisible to casual observers, but readable to anyone who understood her grandmother's code. She worked by candlelight, her fingers moving with desperate precision. Eli faced his own preparations. The rescue operation would require perfect timing and intimate knowledge of the ranch layout. He studied guard rotations, identified escape routes, and coordinated with Martha to ensure access to the worker quarters during the celebration. "Morrison's getting close," he warned during one of their meetings. "Showed my description to 3 people today. Won't be long before someone talks. Can you avoid him until after the wedding?" "Maybe, but if he identifies me during the ceremony, everything falls apart." The pressure mounted as their carefully laid plans faced real-world complications. Too many variables, too many ways for disaster to strike before they could achieve their goals. Martha's final dress fitting revealed another disturbing development. Her father had grown suspicious about her recent behavior and assigned additional guards to watch her movements. The young woman arrived at the general store with 4 armed escorts instead of her usual 2. "He knows something's wrong," Martha whispered during the fitting. "Asked why I've been visiting town so often. What did you tell him?" "Wedding nerves. But I don't think he believed me." Suki felt the walls closing in around their operation. Blackstone's suspicions, Morrison's investigation, and the approaching deadline created a perfect storm of threats. Any one of them could destroy months of careful planning. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, mentioned that Territorial Governor William Hayes would attend the wedding personally. His presence would provide protection they desperately needed and credibility for their accusations. "Hayes has been investigating territorial corruption," Mrs. Henderson explained innocently. "They say he's planning major reforms." The governor's attendance transformed their dangerous gamble into a legitimate opportunity. If they could present evidence to Hayes himself, surrounded by witnesses he trusted, even Blackstone's influence might not be enough to suppress the truth. With 3 days remaining until the wedding, all pieces of their complex plan were finally in position. Suki's coded quilt was complete. Eli had mapped every detail of the ranch layout. Martha had secured the original ledgers as evidence. The rescue operation was planned to coincide with the public revelation. But Morrison the bounty hunter had narrowed his search to Copper Ridge itself. And Cornelius Blackstone had begun asking pointed questions about the mysterious seamstress who'd gained unusual access to his family and property. The final countdown had begun, with success and disaster balanced on a knife's edge that could cut either way. The morning of Martha's wedding brought an unexpected visitor to Copper Ridge, U.S. Marshal Davis rode into town with an official escort, his federal badge glinting in the early sunlight. His arrival sent ripples of tension through the community, especially among those with secrets to hide. Suki watched from her window as the marshal conducted what appeared to be routine inquiries at the sheriff's office. But his questions focused specifically on Blackstone Ranch and recent territorial labor disputes. Her heart raced with the possibility that their mission might already be compromised. Eli appeared at her door within the hour, his face grim with news that changed everything they thought they knew about their situation. "Marshall's been tracking Blackstone for months," he reported quietly. "Spoke to Morrison about me, but not for the bounty. They want my testimony about the slave catcher I killed." The revelation hit Suki like lightning. The federal officer wasn't hunting Eli as a fugitive. He was seeking him as a witness in a larger investigation into illegal labor operations across multiple territories. "It gets bigger," Eli continued. "Your Boston partners were arrested 2 weeks ago. Marshall has their records, including documentation about Tobias and other people they sold west." Suki's legs gave out beneath her. The nightmare that had driven her across the continent was finally ending, but in ways she'd never imagined possible. Her testimony could help convict not just Blackstone, but an entire network of human traffickers. "He wants to meet," Eli said. "Both of us. Says we might be the keys to bringing down the whole operation." The clandestine meeting took place in the church rectory, with Reverend Thompson serving as neutral witness. Marshal Davis proved to be a sharp-eyed man in his 50s, who'd spent years building cases against territorial corruption. "Miss Calloway," he began, producing official documents that proved her real identity and legal status. "You're no longer a fugitive. Your former partners confessed to theft of intellectual property and illegal human trafficking. We need your testimony to complete our case." The weight of months carrying false guilt lifted from Suki's shoulders. She was free to reclaim her name, her reputation, and her life's work. But the marshal's next revelation proved even more significant. "Mr. Boone, the man you killed was under federal investigation for exceeding his legal authority. You saved lives and eliminated a criminal. There are no charges against you." Eli's transformation was visible. The haunted look that had shadowed his features for 2 years began to fade as the truth of his vindication sank in. "But we need your help," Marshal Davis continued. "Today's wedding provides perfect cover for a coordinated operation, If you can gather evidence and witnesses while we position our forces, we can end Blackstone's operation permanently. The stakes had suddenly escalated beyond their wildest expectations. They were no longer planning a desperate rescue mission. They were participating in a federal law enforcement operation that could reshape territorial justice. The governor's attendance wasn't coincidental, the marshal explained. We've been planning this confrontation for weeks. Your intelligence about the ranch layout and guard positions has been invaluable. Suki realized that their careful surveillance had been feeding information to federal investigators without their knowledge. Every detail Eli had gathered, every observation from her visits to the ranch, had helped build the case that would finally destroy Blackstone's empire. What do you need from us? Continue exactly as planned. Present your evidence publicly during the celebration. When Blackstone's crimes are exposed in front of witnesses, we'll move in with warrants and federal authority. The marshal's confidence was infectious, but Suki understood that success still required perfect execution. Too many variables could still go wrong, and Blackstone's desperation might make him extremely dangerous. Martha arrived at the church an hour before the ceremony, radiant in her wedding dress but trembling with nervous energy. She carried the original ledgers hidden beneath her bridal bouquet, along with additional financial documents she'd stolen from her father's safe. "He knows something's happening," she whispered urgently. "Doubled the guards this morning and questioned the staff about recent visitors. I think someone told him about our meetings." The revelation that their cover might be blown sent adrenaline coursing through Suki's veins. If Blackstone suspected their plan, he could move Tobias before they had chance to act. "The quilt," Martha continued. "Where is it?" Suki produced her masterwork from its protective wrapping. The wedding quilt gleamed with intricate patterns that concealed months of gathered evidence. To casual observers, it appeared to be an extraordinarily beautiful gift. To anyone who understood her grandmother's codes, it told the complete story of Blackstone's criminal empire. "When do we reveal it?" "During the gift presentation, right after the territorial governor offers his congratulations. Maximum witnesses, maximum impact." The church bells began ringing, signaling the ceremony's approach. Guests were already arriving at Blackstone Ranch in carriages and wagons, including territorial politicians, whose presence would ensure that today's revelations couldn't be suppressed or ignored. Eli took his position among the hired workers serving the celebration. His size made him conspicuous, but also provided perfect cover for coordinating the rescue operation that would free Tobias and dozens of other enslaved workers. "Whatever happens," he told Suki before departing, "don't let Blackstone escape. Too many people have suffered for his crimes." As the wedding bells echoed across Copper Ridge, Suki felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders. Everything she'd endured, every sacrifice she'd made, every night spent stitching coded messages by candlelight had led to this moment. The final confrontation was about to begin, with federal law enforcement, territorial government, and the assembled power structure of 3 counties serving as witnesses to justice long delayed. The wedding celebration at Blackstone Ranch sparkled with territorial grandeur. 300 guests filled the decorated courtyard, including Governor Hayes and influential politicians from across the region. Cornelius Blackstone moved through the crowd like a king surveying his domain, unaware that federal agents had already surrounded his property. Suki arrived with the other gift-bearers, her precious quilt wrapped in pristine white cloth. Martha glowed beside her new husband, but her eyes constantly searched the crowd for signals that their plan remained intact. The stolen ledgers lay hidden beneath the gift table, waiting for their moment of revelation. Eli worked among the serving staff, his massive frame drawing occasional glances but no suspicion. He'd positioned himself near the main house where he could signal the federal agents when the evidence presentation began. Every muscle in his body coiled with anticipation. Governor Hayes took the podium as the sun reached its zenith, offering congratulations that masked his true purpose. His speech praised the territorial progress that honest business leaders like Blackstone represented. The irony sent knowing glances between the conspirators. "And now," the governor announced. "Let us honor this happy couple with tokens of our community's affection." The gift presentation began with predictable offerings: silver candlesticks, fine china, imported fabrics from back east. Each present received polite applause while guests sipped champagne and enjoyed the afternoon festivities. Suki stepped forward when Martha nodded the signal. She unwrapped her quilt with ceremonial care, allowing the intricate patterns to catch the sunlight. Gasps of admiration rose from the assembled crowd as they beheld what appeared to be the finest needlework any of them had ever witnessed. "A wedding quilt," Suki announced, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Each panel tells a story of this territory's growth and prosperity." She began explaining the patterns, seemingly describing decorative elements while actually decoding the hidden messages for those who understood. Financial records disguised as flower petals, transportation routes marked as decorative borders, names and dates woven into geometric designs. Governor Hayes moved closer, his trained eye recognizing the coded information immediately. Other guests admired the artistry while missing the damning evidence displayed before them. "This panel," Suki continued, pointing to a section that contained Blackstone's financial records, "shows the careful planning required for successful agricultural ventures." Blackstone himself approached the display, his face darkening as he began to comprehend what he was seeing. His wealth, his crimes, his entire illegal empire lay exposed in beautiful stitchwork that no one could dismiss as mere accusation. "Where did you learn these techniques?" he demanded, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. "My grandmother taught me to tell stories with thread." "And what story does this tell?" Suki met his eyes without flinching. "The truth about how some fortunes are built." The tension in the courtyard shifted as perceptive guests sensed the confrontation developing before them. Governor Hayes stepped forward, examining the quilt with obvious official interest. "Fascinating work. These patterns seem to contain detailed information." Martha chose that moment to retrieve the ledgers from beneath the gift table. Her hands shook as she presented the stolen documents to the governor, but her voice remained steady. "These belong with the quilt. They tell the same story." Blackstone lunged toward his daughter, but Eli's massive form blocked his path. The confrontation erupted into chaos as federal agents emerged from their concealed positions throughout the crowd. "Cornelius Blackstone," Marshal Davis announced, producing official warrants. "You're under arrest for human trafficking, illegal imprisonment, and violation of federal labor laws." The assembled guests watched in stunned silence as the territory's most powerful rancher was surrounded by armed lawmen. His protests of innocence died when Governor Hayes began reading selected entries from the stolen ledgers aloud. Names, prices, transportation details. The systematic documentation of human slavery disguised as legal business operations. Evidence so overwhelming that even Blackstone's political allies began distancing themselves from his vicinity. Eli slipped away during the arrests, leading a coordinated rescue operation toward the worker quarters. 23 enslaved people were liberated within the hour, including Tobias, who collapsed into his sister's arms with tears of disbelief and joy. The reunion overwhelmed Suki's careful composure. Months of fear and desperate searching ended in her brother's embrace, his freedom restored by courage she'd never known she possessed. The Black Widow had finally shed her cursed reputation. Within days, the territorial newspapers carried headlines about the Blackstone scandal. Suki's role as the key witness transformed her from mysterious outcast to celebrated hero. Her needlework skills became legendary, but now for reasons that honored rather than frightened people. Martha inherited the ranch and immediately converted it to legitimate operations, offering fair wages to former captives who chose to remain. She used her father's ill-gotten wealth to fund schools and medical facilities for territorial communities. Eli accepted Marshal Davis's offer to join federal law enforcement, his knowledge of territorial routes and hidden communities proving invaluable for similar rescue operations. His reputation transformed from dangerous giant to protector of the innocent. Governor Hayes personally restored Suki's legal rights and intellectual property claims, ensuring she received recognition and compensation for years of stolen work. She chose to remain in Copper Ridge, opening a dress shop that became the territory's finest. The town that once shunned the Black Widow now celebrated Susanna Calloway as their most distinguished citizen. Her needlework classes attracted students from across the territory, though few learned the secret codes her grandmother had taught her. On quiet evenings, she and Eli would sit on her shop's front porch, watching the sunset paint Copper Ridge's dusty streets gold. Both had found the belonging and redemption they'd sought, transformed from outcasts to pillars of their community. "I'm dry now, thanks to you," she told him one evening, referring to tears that had finally stopped falling. "We both are." Their unlikely alliance had not only saved lives but reshaped an entire territory's understanding of justice and human dignity. The storm that brought them together had cleared, leaving behind a peace neither had dared imagine possible. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.